Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Near Memo. This is episode 139. It's me, Greg Sterling, and Mike Blumenthal today with our special guest, Curtis Boyd, who's going to be, this is a dedicated episode talking about review fraud, the state of review fraud, whether Google's having any impact on it, making a dent. And then specifically, we're going to be talking a lot about LSA review fraud that Mike has been writing about quite a bit lately. And Curtis can tell you a little bit more about his background, but for people that don't know him, he's the CEO and co-founder of the Transparency Company, which is a company dedicated to identifying review fraud and helping consumers and businesses by kind of rooting out the bad actors. And he's really the leading expert on the state of review fraud, given his company's work. Curtis, do you want to add anything to that?
I would add one thing, that his middle name is Sisyphus.
Meaning the Greek character who
pushes that stone up the hill only to have it fall down.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so Curtis Sisyphus.
What you really mean, this is a Sisyphusian endeavor. So yes. Curtis, what else do you want to tell us about your company?
Oh man. Well, it sometimes feels like that, to build technology to identify reviews and then, learn that some people really don't care about it. It sometimes feels like that boulder is just rolling right over me. But fortunately, we're living in a time where more and more regulators are starting to care about fake reviews. And it's a very exciting time for us and the company. We use algorithms to detect fake online reviews. We look at content, we look at behavior in the profiles, and we're able to make very accurate predictions on whether reviews were earned or paid for, and then print evidence that's usable in court for regulators to pursue those bad actors or to send that evidence to administrators. Unfortunately, they don't listen nearly as well, so it can be tough to get administrators to.
And when you say administrators, you're talking about the platforms themselves?
Yeah. It's very difficult to communicate with administrators, even when you show them proof that reviews are fake and say, "Hey, here's the proof. These reviews are clearly fake. Can you please take them down?" And oftentimes, you'll have to use Google product experts, or on different platforms you can use people who have relationships with these administrators. But it's a lengthy process, as Mike and I'm sure the rest of the world knows. Communicating with Google is very difficult or impossible, and getting them to admit that these reviews are fake are often a massive struggle.
Well, my theory on Google, as somebody who submits a lot of fake reviews or reviews that don't show, is that one, they put hoops in the way to jump through to make it so that not everybody can request this, but that it's an accumulation of evidence they need to take it down. So you start with a simple report, then you go to an appeal, and maybe you file an abuse report, and then you take it to the forum with a case number. By the time you take it to the forum and then escalate it, you're actually going to get a human looking at it through the forum. So what happens initially is automated, and in the forum it's probably manual. Thus, any rational human being looking at this rational evidence ultimately acts. So I do think there's sort of a weird madness to this process in Google, but it's obtuse and too complicated and really difficult.
Just in case anybody who's listening to this isn't intimately familiar with this problem, which most people probably are. Let's sort of lay out what's at stake, both for the consumer and for the business, the honest businesses, with the phenomenon of review fraud, because it's annoying for people that are involved with it. It can be very difficult, challenging to deal with. But what's at stake in the broader sort of online economy for business owners and for consumers? How would you frame that, Curtis?
Oh man, well. If you think about the cost of review fraud in terms of harm to both consumer and business, it's a massive, massive, massive problem. I'll start with businesses. Small businesses are being put out of business, the honest ones, the ones that refuse to use fake reviews, the ones that are playing nicely, charging consumers regularly. I've personally experienced probably a dozen or so small businesses go out of business while they were experiencing their competitors, just use fraudulent reviews, and that watching them not being able to do anything about it and their life savings going down the drain. It was a tormenting experience. And then for consumers, I didn't mean to interrupt you guys. If you wanted to jump in on the business side.
No, I just wanted to throw in one thing there, which is reviews is one of the key local ranking factors. And so if you have more reviews and better stars, and a more volume, you're going to outrank your competitors and you're going to attract consumer attention. Near Media Research has shown to us that it's very clear that consumers gravitate toward those businesses that have higher review volume and better scores, although they're not looking substantively at most of the reviews. So it's squeezing out from a ranking perspective, and also maybe from a conversion perspective, the the honest businesses. But continue, Curtis.
So yeah, in regards to consumer harm, consumers are getting the short end of the stick too. Rather than these honest businesses appearing at the top of search results, you're having unethical business owners using fake reviews, doing whatever means necessary to rank at the top. And unfortunately, a lot of those businesses aren't even the businesses that are doing the actual work. They're lead generation companies that broker out, random subcontractors with unknown reputations to people's homes who charge anywhere from 3 to 10x what that mom and pop would, that local business who's been there for 20 years with a great reputation would have charged. They're extorting consumers. They're paying the middleman who's the lead broker who can afford higher advertising to Google, and Google's loving it. It's my opinion that they're looking for partners who can pay higher advertising budgets, bid higher. And yeah, the good businesses are being pushed out. The consumers are being extorted, and review fraud is just thriving. It's just thriving on this platform.
So we'll get into a discussion of advertising in particular a little bit later in the session. But Mike, I wanted you to give the illustration of the orthopedic surgeon in, I forget, he was in Manhattan or in New York, just as a kind of a case study of the harm that consumers experience from
the
this.
orthopedic surgeon and his wife would regularly either incentivize the employees and relatives to leave good reviews and disincentivize customers who left bad reviews. They would either pay them money to take the bad reviews down, or they would remove their listing so that they couldn't have bad reviews left, or they would only send links out they wouldn't send links out for reviews to unhappy customers. And in the end, they ended up, besides getting divorced, which I thought was an ironic side effect of this, besides that, they got $100,000 fine. But this is an orthopedic surgeon in New York City, where 2 or 3 jobs would more than pay for the fine. So the fine was woefully inadequate given the type of income. And even though this person was being investigated by the FTC and the New York State Attorney Generals and had been reported by, what's the woman's name that does the review reporting?
Kate Dean.
Kate Dean, yes, Kate Dean. She had reported this business multiple times. Even all that, Google still had this guy's fake reviews up until the New York Times article that Curtis was in came out, that we wrote on the same day. It was that article that precipitated Google to look at his listing and take the fake reviews down. It's like, so clearly they had a lot of heads up, both legal and administrative, as well as consumer reports about these fake reviews. And it took a newspaper article in the New York Times. I don't believe the New Media article did it, although maybe, to get Google to take the reviews down.
Well, but
this is a guy who just made tons and tons of money on his fake reviews.
But the point I wanted to make is, if you choose a surgeon and you have surgery, you've chosen the wrong guy, that can be a lifelong problem. Or if you've chosen somebody who's less competent than somebody else, that's a pretty. You not only have you paid the money depending upon your health insurance coverage, you've had somebody cut into you And, that can't really be undone, right? So that's a kind of an extreme
Yeah,
example.
it is an extreme example that's not so extreme, right? I mean, it happens with lawyers, it happens with all sorts of services, and a lot of the services where you see this are people coming into your home. So Curtis is kind, says it's lead gen. I would go so far as to say that there's some criminal aspects to it as well.
Consumer fraud for
More
sure.
than consumer, I mean, it's organized consumer fraud. It's not
Right.
just
Right.
onesies, here's and theirs. This is organized at an internet,
I,
likely at an international level.
I wonder. I wonder if racketeering law would extend to this kind of conduct in some of these jurisdictions that have it.
I don't know.
But so let's talk before let's talk, Curtis, a little bit about what you're seeing about the sort of landscape of review fraud. How widespread is it? Is it concentrated in particular categories more than others? And then we'll get into a discussion about Google's attempts, remedial efforts, and whether they're doing anything. So tell us where it stands today. I mean, you just, for some background, you and I collaborated on a report when I was at an Uberall, and it was kind of the first report of its kind to look at 4 million reviews. We looked at Yelp, Google, TripAdvisor, and Facebook. We found that Google had the most review fraud, and at a very conservative level, we estimated it was about 11%. But then when you got into particular categories, it got as high as 20+%. I think movers was 22%. And there were a lot of categories that were much higher than the average. Google has since instituted some algorithm changes, which Mike has been tracking. And where do things stand today? And then let's talk about whether Google's review filter has done anything more recently.
Sure. Well, what's interesting is since 2021, Google has written these annual transparency reports, which disclose the number of reviews removed by them each year. And the number of fake reviews has gone up 20 to 25% year over year. So in 2021, they removed 70 million. In 2022, they removed 90 million. In 2023, they removed 110 million or 120 million. These numbers are off the top of my head, but every year, 20 plus more million reviews are being identified by them and removed.
Do you think that's a function of them identifying or a function of increased fake reviews or both?
I think it's a function of the number of fake reviews skyrocketing and them doing a little bit more to, or maybe the same effort to remove them. But it's my opinion that the number of fake reviews are significantly going up. In regards to their attempts to address fake reviews and to solve the problem, if you look at fake reviews are so accessible. If you just Google the phrase "buy Google review" in an incognito browser, there will be 10 listing sites where you can just buy them. And the prices haven't gone up. It hasn't gotten harder for them. They're still dirt cheap. They're still $5. So price normally indicates the difficulty of how hard it is to place fake reviews. Some other sites that do a much better job moderating review content, it's much more expensive. Google is still the cheapest website to get fake reviews. And in my opinion, that indicates that they're still super easy to place. What we're seeing in the results so far, almost close to 20%, I think 17, 18%. And to be a little bit more specific, we're conducting a much larger study now. I don't want to get too much into that, but that being said, we're seeing a lot more just clear evidence of review fraud, and then a much higher number of very suspicious activity. And in total, it's almost 40% of these reviews that we're analyzing.
So before we began recording, you sort of broke it into these two buckets: review fraud, fake reviews, where you have a lot of confidence or more than confidence, you're certain these are fraudulent, and then this other category of suspicious reviews that are potentially or probably fraudulent, but it's not quite as confident an assessment.
Yeah.
And you had said that the number for the first category, where you have certainty, it was approaching 18% across the board, right?
Yeah.
Did I understand that correctly?
You did.
Which indicates that but it's higher than when we did the study in 2021.
Yeah.
If I can make that statement.
Yeah, I mean, it's been almost 2.5 years since the study. Our technology's improved. We've got more metrics in place to identify more advanced fake review vendors and their tactics of selling fake reviews. And we know now we have the ability to detect ChatGPT reviews and lots of other methodologies to do this. But yeah, it also came at a time where in the 2 years review fraud has gone up significantly. So
And the reason for that is that the risk to any given business is quite small. I mean,
yeah.
it's different. Google is unlikely to suspend your listing. The chance of enforcement from authorities on any given business is infinitesimally small. And the rewards, because people love review stars, is very high, particularly in LSAs and other merchant.
Go ahead, Curtis.
No, I was going to just agree with Mike and say that right now it would appear that we're basically, as a society, promoting fake reviews. Fake it till you make it. Just do what you need to do to generate business, and it's really terrible. The research we're trying to do is to show that fake reviews isn't a harmless crime. That real people are being impacted daily.
A victimless crime, so-called, like prostitution, for example.
Yeah.
That's often referred to as a victimless crime. Anyway, so
prostitution is probably there's
a
less
metaphor.
Well, it's a bad one because there's less. It's two adults choosing to do something, hopefully, as opposed.
Bad analogy. I take it down. I strike analogy. That. Yes. Right. All right.
Where
I was trying to make a joke.
Consumers are being actively deceived by the reviews and maybe even illegally interacted with when they buy the service. So it's.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, we'll get into that in a second. Are there any categories that are particularly egregious? I mean, 18% ish across the board. Does that show up in a big way in certain categories versus others? What are the biggest offenders?
Yeah, I'm seeing home service industries still dominate a lot of the review fraud sectors. Locksmiths, garage doors, moving companies. I mean,
duct cleaning.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of HVAC and air conditioning, heating. Tons of review fraud. We're also seeing it in the legal sector: personal injury lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, DUI lawyers, family lawyers, immigration lawyers, just riddled with review fraud. We're seeing it a lot in the medical field, surprisingly. LASIK doctors, outpatient surgeries. A lot of the surgical procedures that take place outside of a medical center, especially in dermatology, cosmetic surgery, loaded with review fraud. So, yeah, it's
interestingly, those are all categories that are embraced by LSA at this point.
Yes.
And originally, LSA was meant to vet these businesses and minimize the fraud, and it seems to have become a honeypot for fraud.
Right. I mean, LSAs were designed to give consumers a higher degree of confidence in the businesses and essentially elevate them out of this sort of cesspool of spam and fraud that we're talking about. But it's, as Mike, as you say, that's not been successful. I want to ask a quick question before we go. I know we're eager to talk about LSA fraud. ChatGPT, right? Curtis, you alluded to that. And we started seeing, I forget whether this was on, I think this might have been on Amazon originally. We started seeing kind of months ago some obvious ChatGPT fraudulent reviews where there were references in the reviews to ChatGPT or OpenAI or an LLM. But what tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll go to LSA. What does that look like, and what are you seeing generally about it? How widespread is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's actually fairly widespread, just from actual, like, what I believe are honest businesses having a few random folks saying, you know what, I use ChatGPT so much in my daily life, I'm going to use it to help me write a review. And they're actually, it's my opinion that we're seeing real profiles use ChatGPT to help them write reviews. And that's benign. Like, honestly, that's not something that I have a hard time with. It's when we see large trends, when we see lots of profiles using ChatGPT on the same business, where we can start to make deductions, where maybe we can start to question the legitimacy of this business or these reviews as a cluster. But we certainly are seeing lots of reviews written by ChatGPT.
Well, interestingly, many of the review moderation platforms or not moderation, but reputation management platforms are now employing AI in some fashion, mostly through the OpenAI API, to respond to reviews on behalf of multi-location businesses, right? So they're using them for review responses, which is, there's a question about whether that's entirely ethical, but it's certainly not. It's not fraudulent in the sense that we mean here, because it is the business. They are making a response. This is designed to facilitate more review responses, which are in the minority for these multi-location brands that basically don't respond to reviews otherwise. So the reputation platform is getting in there to increase the count of responses to make consumers perceive the businesses being more responsive to their reviews. But so we're clearly the gravitational force here is with LSA. So let's get into that. So Mike, why don't you give a little primer on what LSA is for the two people that may be listening to this that don't know what that is?
Sure. LSA is Google's program where they vet service professionals through checking employment checks and licensing checks and insurance checks. They validate that these businesses have met these standards, that they have a license, that they have insurance, and their employees are not criminals. And it's an advertising program, a simple point and click program that originally was designed to keep these fake locksmiths out of the system, but it's a very easy to use program that when it is delivered in the SERPs, unfortunately, Google is not clearly marking these as ads, but they are adding what's called a Google guarantee, which means that if you hire a business, click on it to call this business, it's a click per call or click per message charge. It's not a cost per click, cost per call, I mean. And if you call them, you are then covered by Google's guarantee for many of these up to $2,000
for
against
I think
job
that
being done.
Yeah, there are caps on that, but Google is ostensibly offering some to make the consumer whole after some sort of mediation process.
And as we mentioned in a newsletter several weeks ago, consumers are, even if they don't fully understand that these are ads, gravitate towards the rating stars, gravitate towards the guarantee, and frequently we see a massive drop in utilization of the local back and organic when these are present, that people are attracted to them and use them. It really is Google, in this case, stealing clicks from one of their units or two of their units, organic and local, to local service ads.
Right, and there are now something in excess of, I don't know what the number of categories is off the top of my head, but more than 75 categories, and they keep adding categories. They've never released data on the efficacy of these ads, or beyond making sort of bland statements. They've never given hard data on clicks or consumer response or the efficacy really for business owners, but they wouldn't keep adding categories if these weren't very successful.
In most categories, the ads are $30 to $50 per lead, and assuming that the business charges some, any amount more than a couple $100 for the particular business, these have proven to be very cost effective, and they're much more efficient than traditional ads. So even though they might be cheaper than traditional ads to run a campaign, because you can easily turn them off or on, they're much more efficient. They're more likely to grab users than traditional ads. With traditional ads, users are very skeptical. We've seen in our research that they avoid them like a plague.
Well, and this was Google's effort to bring more small business customers into its advertising universe, because AdWords, now Google Ads, was sort of too complicated, or wasn't delivering value, or wasn't delivering enough value to these small business owners. And this was a much more concrete ROI. And the placement of these ads, as you say, Mike, is very prominent. And consumers don't fully understand that they're ads. They look like local listings. They have the Google guarantee or Google Screen badge, and so they're seemingly very trustworthy. People don't really understand what those things mean, but in the same way that all these products in the market are labeled with organic this or fair trade that or whatever, consumers generally, on an intuitive level, sort of see this as some imprimatur of credibility, quality, trustworthiness, and Google's brand has a lot of that to impart to these businesses. So now explain the sort of fraud situation with LSAs.
Sure. So there's two types of fraud, as Curtis alluded to. Firstly, because an LSA from a business can show in multiple markets, unlike their local business listing can only show in the market in which they reside. A business can have a listing in 5 or 6 markets and use a single Google business profile, so they can aggregate reviews. So even a typical HVAC, which may have 3 markets they're in or 4 markets they're in, could show 3,000 or 4,000 reviews on their listing, which is a lot. But what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is lead gen companies that are probably criminal in nature actually being able to figure out how to game Google so that Google associates public space GBPs with these ads. So a lead gen company would create these ads on a single business license in multiple locations and associate it with, say, a park or a hiking area, and get 5,000 or 10,000 reviews associated with their ad. And then you would call these. We actually called. It goes to an Indian call center. Somebody who's not associated with the business that is named and has been vetted shows up at the door. And in our case, we actually had an HVAC person call them in Miami. They're given a quote for $1,300 for a job that should have cost $300. And it was clear from the pricing that on duct cleaning that they weren't even going to do some of the things that they quoted because they underquoted a whole range of things. So, and it's usually in an area like duct cleaning, which is very difficult for the consumer to know whether it's been done or not, whether there's mold or not, that kind of thing.
So just to clarify, and then Curtis, I want you to weigh in. Just to clarify, what you're saying, Mike, is that the consumer is quoted a $1,300 estimate for work that really should normally cost about $300. Not only is the consumer overcharged by a factor of 3x or more, so $1,000 gap between the charge and what should have been charged, but the work is not performed according to best practices or
legal requirements.
Right. So,
and this is an ad that was cost maybe $50. So there's a lot of margin in this too.
Right. So there's an economic incentive to cheat, because you have to have, Google is only going to show there are typically 3 or 4 ads shown depending on the UI, and they're only going to show the ads that have the best ratings and the most review volume. I mean, there's an algorithm, but that's one of the key factors.
And just as a note on the duct cleaning scam, state of Michigan, for example, this scam isn't new to Google. Like the locksmith scam, it sort of precedes Google. The Michigan Attorney General has just sent out an alert to consumers to be aware of the duct cleaning scam. But Google is supercharging this scam with both exposure to very high numbers of searchers and with the Google guarantee and the theoretic Google vetting. But these guys are stealing business licenses and stealing reviews to get approved. So they're supercharging the scam.
Yeah. So Curtis, tell us what you're seeing generally about LSA review fraud.
Oh man. Well, the LSA review jacking thing, we once the Mike and brought attention to it, we started investigating it a bit more. It's fascinating stuff. We're seeing even as far, I've seen one location so far with 20,000 stolen reviews. It's insane. And it's in almost every major city in 2 or 3 separate categories. And these lead gen scammers are stealing business from ethical businesses. They're overcharging consumers, right? And at the end of the day, they have higher. They're able to generate more advertising revenue, which then allows them to change their bidding strategy within their LSA dashboards and say, I want more. I want more and more and more. I can pay you more. I'm the better partner. You should sell all your ads to me. And other people are just getting boxed out. You see these people rank 1, 2, 3 all day long, all night long on the LSAs. And honest business is going, why can't I rank better on LSAs? Why can't I improve my ranking on LSAs? It's because you have people who are much more profitable extorting consumers, being able to outbid you and box you out. And I mean, I don't think Google's complaining very much there.
Right. Just as an example of what Curtis is talking about, so I identified several of these in the Miami, Florida area, which Google took down. But there's a new one that's replaced the ones that were taken down, doing exactly the same thing with a different name and a different business license. And this new fake LSA listing is visible in Miami, Miami Beach, Daytona Beach, Tampa, Orlando, which is, the bulk of large metro areas in Florida. And it's the same effective listing that is visible in all of those. And it ranks number 1 in all those markets. And this is just in the last week, where after Google has been clearly identified of this high review jacking, and there's a new listing that's having broad statewide impact.
One of the things that is the most frustrating about LSA is that there isn't a means to communicate with anyone about disputing fake reviews or the listings themselves, and they never talk. They will never respond. They even created a form for us a few months ago to submit information in regards to fake reviews and fake LSAs. I haven't had one response, let alone one thing done with over almost 1,000 submissions, right? Filling out that form hundreds and hundreds of times. And Google Maps, sure, we get responses when we see action even. But an LSA,
You actually get a case number back,
yeah,
so that you can follow up with Google, because there's a case number to track it through the system, but not with LSAs.
they're basically boxing us out of LSA, saying, stay away from our $1 billion baby. We're making money here. Leave us alone. And it is so frustrating because the number of fake reviews on LSA is way worse than Google Maps. People are spamming LSAs with fake reviews, pumping them full of fake reviews. And sometimes the names, they're not even like coherent names. It's ASDF over and over and over. Like, it's obvious these aren't real profiles, and they'll get 30 to 40 of these per day. And it is so bad. It's so bad.
So this raises the question about Google's intent, the sophistication or the efficacy of Google's takedown efforts. We floated the idea that Google's algorithm changes around review fraud generally on Google Maps and local search was driven in part by the um, Digital Services Act in Europe. That Europe is now, this is sort of a content moderation. It does a bunch of things, but one of the things it does is it tries to protect consumers against fraud, illegal content. In fact, X is now under investigation under this DSA for some other stuff that's irrelevant to this conversation. But so Google and Amazon and some of the other platforms, TripAdvisor, are trying to show, I think, the Europeans that they're making good faith efforts to clean up review fraud. But is this just a performance, or is there any? I mean, we sort of talked earlier about how there's really no impact on actual fraud going on, even though Google is taking down more reviews. It's a whack-a-mole situation.
I'm going to interject here. Firstly, that applies, those new rules apply to map reviews, local reviews. And I do believe that the new algorithms are better and are more effective at showing fewer reviews and taking down more fake reviews, and they have a process. Now, you have to put that in context because fake reviews on Google have existed for 15 years before they actually did anything, right? So they knew about fake reviews in the locksmith, the moving, all the same categories. Now that so Google did do something in local. I don't think it's performative. I think it's actual. But simultaneously, they're highlighting LSA significantly more than maps in these categories where they have none of these controls. And the problem in LSA is multiplied by the guarantees and the claims that Google makes, and the constraints are non-existent. This is Google Maps 2008 from a review point of view. There are virtually no rules, and just the simple rule that one LSA listing could aggregate reviews, or 5 LSA listings could aggregate reviews with 1 GBP, for example, creates strong incentives to have massive numbers of reviews. So built into the system, that doesn't even talk about cheating. That's fair play.
It seems to me, Curtis, that given what you're saying about bidding, that these lead gen companies are able to bid more, and it's a sort of a virtuous cycle in a certain twisted way of winning more business, bidding more, getting more consumers, perpetuating the fraud. That Google could go around in all of these categories and simply look at the top bidders and investigate them. I mean, so that's one thing that they could be doing. Your technology, your methodology, certainly Google could duplicate that and do a better job of catching these folks. But I think that Google just doesn't, that there's some acceptable level of fraud in Google's mind, because they're just not going to be able to police it entirely. And the question is, what's the acceptable level of fraud versus, how much effort they need to make to satisfy their critics and whatever the compliance requirements now they face in Europe. Any thoughts on all of that?
In the U.S.,
I said a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, in the U.S. we have Section 230, so acceptable level of fraud is pretty high, right? Because they're not liable. Here,
it's 100%. That's
in Europe, it's my opinion that they're not going to be concerned with the fines. Just as Mike said, that $100,000 fine for that surgeon, it was nothing. It was pennies, right? And certainly at 20, you're going to see, maybe a $25 to $100 million fine for fake reviews for an entire year. That's nothing to these big tech companies. Sure, no problem. Fine. Allow us to continue doing business, please, and let us on with our way.
It's the cost of doing business, in a sense.
Yeah, and it's nothing. It's such a small number to them.
So let's kind of wrap up here with some practical information for people. I mean, we could go on and give a lot of specific examples, but I think people have a general sense. Review fraud is getting worse. It's particularly egregious in LSA categories, and Google has a disincentive to police it because they're getting revenue from these companies, or they're sort of willful blindness, as they say in the law. What can people do about this, Mike and Curtis? What are the practical steps that ethical, honest businesses and their representatives like SEOs and their digital agencies should and can and should take here?
Well, in terms of licensing abuse, businesses can report to their state licensing agents that somebody has stolen their license and using it inappropriately. The problem is, as I've learned, none of these people know. Like, I've been calling a number of the actual licensees whose number is being used. None of them realized that their license had been stolen, even though one of them had gotten bad reviews about it. So obviously, if agencies find this, reporting them to licensing authorities. I don't know. Given Google's intransigence and slowness and in unwillingness to deal with this, I mean, I would walk away from LSAs if I were any reasonable business and
Well,
move. I don't know
ex-
what to tell them. I mean,
except as you point out, they are very, very effective as an advertising vehicle. I mean, if they are privileged in their position on the SERP, and people click through at very high rates, and so a rational recommendation to business owners is test out LSAs because they perform so well.
yes. And then I guess they would have to monitor their competitors for fraud and report them both to Google and to the state attorney general and to the licensing authorities. That which is what's been happening in maps for years. It was a legitimate tactic to try to find fraud and report it. But this level of fraud is much higher, and a lot of it is criminal. I think my research indicates that at least in the duct cleaning, they're using foreign nationals to deliver the service that are probably undocumented. We don't know that, and that it's international in scope and probably run by a few criminal Albanian or Israeli organizations. We don't know yet. So it's heavy duty stuff.
So, Mike, were you done? Yeah. So, Curtis, you get the last word here. Any practical advice for business owners or their surrogates about how to deal with this?
Holy moly. Well, if you're dealing with it, you're getting your butt kicked, and I hate to say it like that, but you're feeling it, right? Your revenues are down, calls are down, and you're wondering where is it going, right? It's going to fraudsters. It's going to these lead gen scam artists. And how do you fight them? You get evidence, right? You get evidence that they're actually doing the thing. There was a locksmith company in San Diego who literally put on spy glasses and called the competitor and had the undocumented freelancer who was an independent contractor come to their car to unlock the car. And he proved that he wasn't the company that he called. He proved that, he was his own business entity with his own stuff. And he had to do that multiple times, and he was able to get action. But these are the crazy lengths that you have to go to try to do something about it, and maybe you'll get a result. So I don't even want to set anyone's expectations incorrectly. It's really hard right now, and it's really bad. And there are people who are really trying to make a difference, but I think the best thing we can do is to create awareness around it and educate people, and hopefully through our shared collective voice, we can get the 800-pound gorilla to notice us.
Well, and as you pointed out, Mike, at the beginning or near the beginning, when these large media outlets, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, TV, and others cover these stories, Google takes action because
but just whack-a-mole action. They don't create systemic change, and that's another problem. They just paper over these immediate problems like they did with the few locations I reported, but they don't stop future locations from doing the same thing. And it's a huge issue with Google. This is how they roll. They paper over the problem that the New York Times reports, and then they move on.
Well, I remain hopeful that as we and others try and expose these problems, that there will be some change in the system that makes it more in alignment with consumer expectations, which is, that these reviews have integrity, because there is no real alternative for consumers. I mean, in a products context, you can go to Wirecutter or you can look at editorial reviews, and there are sort of alternatives in certain niches that you can consult that are alternatives to reviews. But in the aggregate, there is nothing that consumers can rely upon that will stand in for reviews right now. But I'm hopeful that we either there is a successor system that comes into place, or we get better enforcement over time through the Sisyphusian struggle, to bring it back to that Greek classical metaphor.
Need to get steamrolled a few more times, but we're going to make it to that hill.
Yes, exactly. All right. So Excellent discussion, you guys. Thanks very much. There's a lot more to talk about, and we'll continue this discussion in 2024. Everybody have a great holiday, or if your holiday's already passed, hopefully it was great. And get some rest. Enjoy the some time off, and looking forward to a better 2024. Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.